Welcome to the Brothers in Crime podcast.
We are brothers.
We talk about true crime.
We don't take ourselves too seriously.
And you shouldn't either.
Nearly half a century, Sarah Martin and her family were told the person responsible for her brother's death was behind bars. But last month, years of DNA testing revealed detectives arrested the wrong person. 8 News reporter Roland Wilson joining us now live in studio tonight after speaking with the victim's sister. And Roland, what was her reaction to this news?
Who's going to help my family find my brother's killer? And that's what I want to know.
That might sound a little bit familiar, and if it does, it's because in episode 62, we talked about Marvin Grimm Jr.'s wrongful conviction out of Richmond, Virginia. He had spent over 40 years in prison and he received an actual writ of innocence, which is pretty crazy. And so we covered that whole thing from Marvin's point of view in episode 62. And not long after that episode dropped, the lady that we just heard from a second ago, who is the victim in that case's sister, Sarah, reached out to us and asked us if we would be willing to kind of help get her family's side of the story out. So here we are.
Yeah, I mean, actually, she didn't reach out with a request at first. It started as, and I think I'm going to screw up your outline here, but it started out during that episode 62 when we talked about the horrible tragedy that happened to Marvin Grimm being locked up for 400 years and showering in nut juice.
Shout out little Woody.
It's Woody.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, 2 O's, long O, man. Once we know that Marvin Grimm is not the dude, like he didn't do it, then the question is, well, who the heck killed this kid? You know, a 3-year-old, and he's got the drugs and alcohol in his system, and so this wasn't just some little accident. What happened? And so, we were speculating, and we don't know nothing about nothing. We don't know this family from a can of paint, and so we're just running through all the scenarios of, was it some kind of like horrible neglect that the kid was just let to run free, or whatever. And I think, Sarah heard that along with speculation on every other podcast and whatnot, and reached out, was like, hey, hold on a minute. There's this isn't that. Mm-hmm. And, I think she just wanted to clarify at first. And then, I asked some questions of her and, wanted to know a little bit more. And she was more than happy to, fill in all kinds of blanks. I still need to put the family tree she gave us on a whiteboard because, she was very detailed about, who and what, but it swirls around in my head a little bit. But that's how we ended up getting in contact with Sarah to start with. And then, of course, both of us have had multiple conversations back and forth. Just the main thing for me was I wanted to understand, take me back to, this was 1975.
Mm-hmm.
Take me back to 1975.
Your teenage years, yeah.
Put me as a fly on the wall in that apartment complex. I want to get a feel for what's happening there, who's who and what's what. And she, even though she wasn't alive then, was able to fill in those blanks and help with that. And to be clear, in our speculating, it wasn't that we were necessarily saying that the family has done wrong here. I think and of course there are many cases where that is the case, and like I said, we don't know this family, but our thinking was it has to be someone close to this child, and we'll get into that as we go on, but that may or may not have meant family. There's lots of people that are...
Right. Inner circle, or somebody who knows or has access or something.
Right.
Maybe they live in the apartment building or whatever. Yeah.
It just didn't seem like random stranger danger.
Right, which is why the police went after the guy across the hall.
And they were wrong.
They were totally wrong.
Right.
And we covered that. So if you haven't listened to it, episode 62, we go into great lengths as to all the things they got wrong in Marvin Grimm's case. But today's episode, we really want to get into what happened, what we do know, and honestly to just shed light on this case, because what I've seen, and I've been able to kind of see on social media, which I think I'm a little more active on than you are, and in some of this news reporting stuff on the case, Is it? I think Sarah really just wants this. Like, she wants them to work on this case and figure out who killed her brother. And I can't blame her one bit. I want that too. So we're going to try to keep this thing going. And I've reached out to the Richmond Police Department twice and have heard absolutely nothing back. And so I think it's going to be one of those things where
Not even a kiss my ass.
no, not even a no answer for you, just no response. And I've used their official, you must use this, request, blah, 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 all that happy stuff. And I haven't heard anything. So I think it's going to take some people pressing some buttons and, legally pressing some buttons and making some noise to try to make stuff happen, unless they're just doing stuff behind the scenes and, not telling anybody, which I'm too cynical for that. So.
Yeah, I get a little bit tired of the standard law enforcement line of we're not going to comment on an active investigation, because that can cover either stuff that would hurt the investigation if it was made public, which would be, a reasonable reason not to disclose it, but it also covers, we ain't doing a damn thing.
Right, yeah, we're doing nothing. Yeah, well, before we dive too much into that, I think I do want to just recognize too, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, but the impact on, imagine, put yourself in the shoes of this family of Christopher, which, at this point now, there's everything I've seen. I think in our original coverage, we stayed with initials because that's how the court did it. But in the media coverage, as Sarah and her family have sort of pursued putting this out there and getting support and having accountability that his case is investigated and that the police are doing what they're doing, they've been using his name. And so that's why the kind of the shift from initials to his name. But, Christopher's family, to go from, well, they got the guy and he's in prison and he's been challenging his conviction all these years, to now you realize and you find out that, well, no, it wasn't him, and we're positive it wasn't him because he proved it wasn't him.
Not only is he out, but guess what? The last 40 years, forget all that.
Yeah.
You got to go back to Christopher was murdered, and that's, at this point, the last bit of the story anybody knows.
And whoever did it has just been doing who knows what for the last 50 years, which is terrifying. So I just want to recognize that. I think sometimes podcasts, the media, and us as individuals, we can sort of gloss over the fact that these are real people with real lives and real feelings who are going through something that is, I can't imagine. That's like a whirlwind on a roller coaster meets a tsunami. It's got to be very difficult emotionally.
Yeah, I can't imagine for her mother, who went through this, what's now been, almost 50 years ago, almost 50 years ago. So for 48, 49 years until this all came out that Grimm didn't do it, this horrible thing happened, but at least she thought she knew who done it and that justice was served, that man was in prison.
Right, is where it should be.
Erase that. No. That wasn't the guy, and whoever did it, we don't know.
He's back to square one. And
then for Sarah, this is her whole entire life. I imagine I know it's a significant piece of who she is, that this event occurred, that her brother was murdered while her mother was pregnant with her. So she's grown up her entire life knowing and believing that her brother was murdered by this neighbor. The neighbor was arrested, incarcerated, and is rotting in prison. So can't bring back Christopher, but at least the person that did it is responsible. So this thing that's been a part of her entire life, and I say it's been a part of her entire life because if a parent has several children and one of those children is murdered while playing outside, if you don't think that has an effect on how those parents treat, I don't want to say treat because it's
how
not
they parent. It's going to affect their parenting.
Yeah, you think they're going to be scared of everything? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this thing that's impacted her whole life now, it's just like that part is not. Yes, your brother was murdered, like we said, and with the mom and everything else, but don't know who did it. No justice.
Right.
And it doesn't sound like she's getting any luck from Richmond PD or anywhere of
Yeah.
finding answers.
Right. And so Sarah asks, who's going to help my family? And, we might be a small independent podcast that's funded from Bob's independent wealth, but we're gonna do our best to get the word out there, to share Sarah's story, and to hopefully do what we can to bring light to it. And maybe who knows, maybe we'll help to get the Richmond PD to at least tell us what's going on.
That's always your angle on some of these older cold cases, is that maybe the noise will spur the police to do something. I have a little bit different hope in that someone out there knows something that maybe they don't think is important, or maybe they've been holding on to something for 50 years that they know is the answer to this. And all it takes, I know it's a 1,000,000 to 1 odds, but all it takes is for one person that happens to hear this to be reminded and say, yeah, I really need to make that right.
Or even maybe potentially more likely would be if you have somebody whoever did this confided in somebody.
Right.
And then it's like, well, it doesn't really matter because whatever. Now, whoa, it actually really does matter. It always mattered, but maybe you start thinking on it and you go, you know what, I need to speak up. So yeah, I think I know that's your, we each kind of have our own angles that we care more about, but I think that's a very valid point. So hopefully, through this, and I don't mean to say like we're special or anything, but we've had a string of cases that we've covered that have been cold for a long time, and then eventually some things have happened. So I'm hopeful that this is one of those cases.
So the person coming forward with some information that they hadn't shared before, I always go back to the South Carolina case. Trey Gowdy prosecuted it, and there was a hairdresser that had her salon set up in a mobile home.
I've seen his forensic files.
And she was murdered in her shop one night. She was sexually assaulted and murdered. And the leads, whatever, they ain't figured it out. And I believe it was something like 10 years later. What happened was this one guy, it turns out it was like a 17, 18-year-old, somebody that was in high school at the point of the murder, that actually committed the murder. And he had told a friend the day of the murder that he was going over to get his hair cut and how much he liked this woman and whatnot. And then apparently after the fact, he confessed to this person that he done did it, but threatened to kill him if he ever said a word about it.
As one does. Or
said a word about him going over there. And this dude, he kept that secret for like 10 years until the daughter of the murdered woman, the kids were young at the time. They were 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, they were young at the time. But 10 years after the murder, this guy's working as a mechanic, and this girl brings her car in to get worked on, and it's the daughter of the murdered woman. And somebody says, hey, who that is? She's the one, that was her mom. So now this guy that's, turning wrenches looks at this girl, and it starts to eat at him. He's like, that's her daughter, and she doesn't know.
It's real. You can't just keep it out of your mind anymore.
Yeah, she's a real person.
Yeah.
Like, I'm standing here looking at her, and I know something that she really should know. And he was like, the hell with this. And that's when he, went and spilled the beans.
Yeah.
So that's what I say. You never know when that, and of course then that cat was, taken care of. That's why I say you just never know how that chance encounter of spurring somebody that knows something is going to make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we do have Sarah's permission to do an episode here about Christopher Harper. I asked if it was okay if we could do that.
Yeah, and we're always glad. We've had some other folks reach out, and we're talking to other folks, and anytime that we can use this platform to help somebody in any way, I think, generally we're excited to do that. So this is the least we can do in this kind of case, and hopefully getting this information out there, and we can kind of spread the word, bring awareness to this case, and somebody who knows something, or whatever, we can make an impact. So, so you've already covered, like you said, you got ahead of the outline. I wanted to make sure that we talked about the fact that, you know, when we were sort of speculating last time, we were open about the fact that, hey, look, we don't know these people, but we're curious, like who's in his orbit and what was happening and what was going on. And obviously from the things that Sarah has shared with us in her emails and in talking to her through social media, it seems really clear that they had honestly, like the kind of family anybody would want. Just a tight-knit, loving, caring, good family, good values, hardworking people, salt of the earth kind of folks. And so...
Yeah, Dad was in the military.
Yeah.
And they chose that neighborhood in Richmond intentionally for the safety.
Right.
You know, Dad was safety conscious.
Yeah.
After the military, he went and did some, I don't know the specifics, but did some kind of collections work or something as a civilian. But, you know, yeah, he was safety minded and picked that neighborhood for the safety factor. And it seems like, wasn't that an issue in the Brittany Phillips?
Yeah.
And we hear
You're trying your best to put yourself or your family somewhere safe. And then, you know, the reality is, unfortunately, like the world we live in it's just, you know, there's a lot of evil out there. So you can do all the right things. You can go to the right place. And at the end of the day, like sometimes there's just nothing you can do.
It don't mean nothing. I mean, the only safe place is if you're going to find a way to seclude yourself from all human beings and all critters that want to eat you.
You going to go out there and live with the Unabomber?
I mean, it's like that's the best way to be safe is to be completely away from people, because people are the most dangerous animal on earth.
That's true. That's true. But yeah, so with that in mind, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that we've learned about Christopher and Sarah, their family, all that. But we want to kind of just go back and look at this case. You know, last time we really looked at it through the lens of Marvin Grimm's wrongful conviction. And so we focused specifically on the evidence that was outlandish, the evidence that never existed. We focused on all the ways that the prosecution against him was faulty and wrong and bad and all that. And so we want to go back to this case and look at it through the lens of, well, what evidence is there or was there that we know of? And what do we know about this case now that we can look at maybe who's responsible, or what are some thoughts on that? So I think that's kind of the goal for today. Does that sound about right?
Sure.
Okay, cool. So let's go back to the scene. And I know we've touched on it a little bit, but it's winter time in 1975, and we're in Richmond, Virginia, in this, like you said, it's an apartment building in an area that really, by all means, should have been a safe place. You mentioned Sarah's dad, Christopher's dad, that he did collections work, and I think that's something that's going to kind of pop up a little bit in terms of thinking through maybe who some potential suspects could be. And so I feel like that might be a good starting off point. Sarah, in her correspondence with us, mentioned, and then we were able to see in some newspaper articles that she shared and that we found online, one of the pieces of evidence that's just kind of, I don't even know what to say about it from this case, but is that there was letters that were sent to the editor of the Richmond newspaper and to Christopher's parents that essentially said that that Christopher was, I think it was kidnapped as sort of a punishment or as retribution or something against Christopher's father.
Right.
And we asked if, Sarah obviously was in utero at this time, but we still asked, if she had seen or had copies or knew exactly the contents of the letters specifically in detail. And she had not, and she didn't. And it's my understanding, that's basically as far as we got. We reached out. Like I said, I can't get the Richmond PD to respond to me. And so I thought, potentially you would think they would have those in their case file, but if it's an active investigation, they're not going to share the case file. But that was part of why I wanted to know that, because if they're not reopening this, then I'd like to FOIA the case file and see what they have in it. If it is active, then they're probably not going to share with me, but I can try anyway. But if they don't respond, I can't really get or do anything.
Yeah. Now, she did say that her dad had given them a list of about, what was it, like 10 people that he had issues with, and we're not suggesting that he had at the ready a list of 10 people that he thought wanted to kill him or his family. Just the police tend to ask you in these situations, anybody that had a beef with you.
Yeah, is there anybody at all that you, yeah, exactly.
Anything you had to, any kind of run-in about.
Sure.
And so that's
I mean,
where
10,
that
I could probably make a list of like 50, so that's kind of impressive.
Well,
it's a pretty short list.
Fortunately, I forget a lot of people and a lot of things that happen. So, but I think we need to back up a step here to like what was actually going on that day before we get into the investigation.
Well, that's me putting the cart ahead of the horse or whatever. So
it was, you're in Richmond in this apartment complex again that Mr. Harper had chosen for its safety, and the kids are outside playing. 3-year-old Christopher and his brother Jason, who I believe was 6 at the time.
Weren't there some neighbor kids too? I thought I remember that somewhere. Like it was this kind of place where like it wasn't like they were just out there and it was just them. It was like maybe there was some of the neighbors' kids where I thought.
Yeah. Yes. And, right. I was thinking about the brother Jason's age, and I think I have that wrong. I don't think he was 6, but Christopher and his brother, let's just say that, Christopher and his brother were outside playing. Yes, there were neighbor kids out there all playing. Everything's cool. Mom, who was, I believe, 21 at the time, and is pregnant with Sarah. So Sarah's present there. She just doesn't really have much memory of it because her view was blocked for Belly.
Yeah.
Goes to take the Christopher's brother and put him down for a nap, and she does that, and then when she comes back out, Christopher's gone. And so where the heck is he? Now, someone had said, and I Sarah doesn't have a clear picture of all the exact details of that afternoon because she didn't exist then. But there was some mention that Christopher had gotten into a little squabble with one of the other kids over a toy. Okay, this does not lead to Christopher being abducted, drugged,
and murdered,
alcoholed, and murdered, and then found some ways away. So that just doesn't even.
That doesn't
wash.
jive.
Yeah. And so there was Christopher, who was 3 in 1975. Sarah was born the following year, into the next year. There were twins.
It's a pretty good sized family. I mean, not huge, but like, solid, like several kids. And
the other thing, when we were talking and speculating about, okay, well, this kid was out there alone. All right, well, first of all, he was out there with a bunch of other kids and his own brother. Mom just, took the brother in to put him down.
Right, when you find that out, right, that it's like, well, she's the reason that she's not physically there for a moment is that she's putting her other kid down. And you think this is 1975. I know how many times our parents, this is not uncommon in that time.
That is the other thing.
That left with some neighbor kids.
I'm thinking about today's society and how things work and how things are and what's expected. And in 1975, it would not be a thing to be, let the kids out there playing. We didn't know the story, but now we know the story. Mom was momming. She, as Sarah said, like she never drank alcohol or, there was no crazy stuff going on.
And that's an interesting point. I think in her email said that like alcohol wasn't a thing in their house. So like that's just another point of okay. So it's not like he, there's just alcohol everywhere, or that they inadvertently,
pills,
or that they were any of that.
And about Christopher, he was blonde-haired, blue-eyed.
Oh, he's an adorable kid. Oh my gosh.
Sarah described him as, was it chunky or chubby little thing?
Yeah.
And that an older family member had told her that he was pretty ornery, which 3-year-old boys can be ornery. They grow out of it by the time they're 50 or 60, though.
I was going to say, I'm not there yet.
Yeah,
so
that's why I'm assuming.
that's your best guess.
You know, so I'm told. Anyway, and the other siblings, just they can they don't remember a lot of detail, and I guess not when you're that young and something like that happens. But yeah, 1975, it was a different world. I know even in the early 80s, it was not a problem for me in the apartment complex that we lived in at the time in the city to be at the playground, which was around the other side of the building. So wasn't even something that mom could look out a window and see me. It just was a different world.
Yeah, I mean, I even being a little bit or a good bit younger than you, I remember that there was a lot of that where oh, so and so's going to be there. Okay, fine. Like, go play with your friends.
Right.
As long as you might not go somewhere like that completely alone, but if anybody else is there, then okay, it's fine. Which now that seems a little crazy, but back then that was what you did.
Yeah, different time, different
for
world,
hours.
man.
I mean, it wasn't even like, oh well, okay, for a half hour. I mean, it was like, okay, sure, yeah, go to the playground.
Well, I mean, my generation, which is different than your weird generation, but my generation, people joke about it all the time. The rule was be home when the streetlights come on. And so in our paternal grandparents' neighborhood, where everybody knew everybody going back 2 generations, even at the age of 5, me and my cousins would be just all over that neighborhood. And as long as we were back by the time the streetlights came on, we were good. Now, Grandma would yell when lunch or dinner was ready, but if you missed it, you just missed it, and you weren't missing much. But
you're not wrong.
She was kind of an angry cook. But that was the norm.
That's funny. Yeah, no, it's true. It definitely was different times.
So yeah, I think that is. And was it Sarah was saying that I think her mom had told her that he loved food. He loved all food.
I mean, yeah, I pulled up a picture of him there. You can see he's got those little sausage fingers for a kid.
He is not malnourished. We know this.
And I mean, it's like in this picture. Just describe it for the listeners, right? He's got on like a little white dress shirt and one of those, like clip-on kids ties. And this looks like the kind you take at like JCPenney or whatever, that kind of picture.
Sears.
But yeah, I mean, you could tell in like the smile and the look in his face. I mean, he looks like one of those kids that's like, we would have had a good time together. It would have been fun.
Yeah, he's always thinking it appears.
We would have gotten some trouble together. So, yeah. Oh, that's just heartbreaking.
I know this is after the event, but Sarah explaining her childhood and upbringing, mom went to nursing school, became a nurse, and worked forever as a nurse. It wasn't too long ago that she finally retired. So mom, between school and being a nurse, wasn't maybe home as much as she had been before, or a home as much as a stay-at-home mom would be. But Sarah described that Dad was he was the rock and the lean-to of the family. So this isn't even an issue where the parents weren't paying attention or weren't around. The only reason Mom wasn't really 24/7 is because she was going to school and becoming a nurse. And here's my suspicion. I don't know this as a fact, but I would imagine after an event like this, a mother may be inclined to pour herself into something to keep her mind busy. And perhaps a career that helps other people might be a way to just keep from going insane.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Again, speculation on my part. I've never met the woman, but that was another thing that Sarah really wants to see an answer while her mother's still alive.
Yeah, and I can't. I mean, I that's the thing that really just, I mean, more than anything, right? It bothers me that these families wait and wait and wait and wait. And in this case, the police went after a guy who, and they built a case around, this is our guy, instead of where does the evidence take us?
Right.
And we detailed that in the last one. But so now, This poor woman's left with just, this big question mark, and I hate that. I really hate that.
And you have the forensics people doing dirty to help, like everything about this just was set to just pin it all on Marvin Grimm, when just because you think he's the right guy, and now you just make evidence look like he's the right guy.
Right.
It's crap. Meanwhile, whoever really did this never got brought to justice for it.
Yeah, and just skated on by. So I want to turn back to, we had referenced this one newspaper article in the last episode, but again, that was in a different context. So the headline on this one says, "Clues lacking in boy's death, no suspects." And so it's talking about, this is 2 days after Christopher's body was found along the James River. And at that point, police said they had little information. I think it was Acting Captain Horner, the commander of the Richmond Police Division, who was speaking for the police department, said, "We have no suspects at all at this time. This is going to be a real hard one." So I think that's interesting. And then they kind of, the newspaper recounts, that, his disappearance that we've already talked about. And the apartment where he lived was about 5 miles from where his body was discovered on the banks of the James River. And police pointed out, given his age and the distance, it was clear that he didn't walk all the way there. So I think that tells you something again about the idea of, was this some schoolyard fight over a toy that some kid, alcohol, drugs, and the distance, I think, very clearly rules out anybody under the age of driving, I think.
The alcohol and the drugs in his system just blows my mind and really narrows down what happened here.
Yeah. And so the reporting is that he was last seen alive around 1:30 on this Saturday afternoon. And it details, too, that his mom was 21. So good job. You remembered that. She was worried, called the police around 2:45 to report him missing. It says that around 500 police and volunteer searchers combed the area near the apartments, but found no trace of him. So I think that's also interesting because, again, it's not like, if he's got a toy or something and he wanders 100 yards and then somebody takes him, maybe you find, not necessarily, but you might find whatever toy thing he had, some evidence that this is where an abduction took place.
Or, there was a shoe or something.
Yeah, and so maybe that doesn't mean anything, but it's a dot to collect for information, right? And then, as we mentioned before, so the search ended whenever there was a kind of an estate worker, gardener, landscaper type person who was getting rid of, I think it was like a dead deer that was on a property, and was going down to the river to dispose of it, and found Christopher's body. The dad was that's interesting. You said he did collections work, right?
Yeah, did I get that wrong?
Well, no, I remember that from Sarah's email and I wonder if maybe that was like a temporary job or something. The newspaper reports that he's a produce salesman at this point. But maybe he did that on the side, or maybe it was a little bit of both.
Maybe I've got the timing.
Yeah, maybe he got into that later on.
Confabulated.
Got into that beforehand. I'm not sure, so maybe you can check on that. But the autopsy found that he died from suffocation, and that it wasn't from the water in the river. It wasn't that. It was pre that. They also, of course, now that reporting I think we know to be inaccurate, so I'm just going to skip that. They did mention that there was a single tire track found near the area where Christopher's body was found, and a detective commented to the paper, quote, "It looks like a car left here going pretty fast." So that's interesting, and I don't know if they've kept maybe photographs, tire treads, if there's any sort of evidence from that, but it seems like maybe they had some evidence of the vehicle that potentially was the one that drove him there. So that could be interesting. And now to touch back on the letters that we talked about earlier. So it says police were investigating 2 letters for possible leads. The letters apparently were written by the same person about the case. One was sent to the child's parents, and the other was addressed to John Laird, executive editor of the Richmond Times-Dispatch and Richmond News Leader. Those are newspapers. And the letters said enemies of Harper had abducted the child to hurt Harper. I think this is referring to the dad.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so that is interesting. The letters, I can't think of a reason for anybody to send a letter like that to these places unless it's either to throw off the investigation or for the reasons that the letters state. So what are your thoughts on those letters?
I don't know, other than she said that the letters, and it sounds like it was basically the same letter sent to the two different places, but in the letter it said that another letter would be coming with a ransom request, but that never came along. And I also want to clarify, because I was just looking for something here in my conversations, and I want to clarify that when Mrs. Harper was looking for Christopher after he was not there, that she was told that he'd had a spat with a playmate over a toy, and the mother of that child told Chris to go play elsewhere. And she said, there were several kids out there playing, but as far as adults, she has no clue. She just heard that there were kids out there. Yeah. Apparently there was a mom somewhere. Who knows? Could be looking out a window, and that could be, I doubt if a mother sees her child and another child fighting over a toy, that doesn't seem like grounds for this heinous murder to me.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But I certainly hope the police went and talked to that woman and said, at some point, apparently, you saw more than anybody else. Right. So just seeing a bit around.
Any adults hanging out, any weird cars, anybody you didn't recognize. Yeah.
Right. But we have no information on whether that happened or not.
I know I keep coming back to these letters, but I think that this is just, I mean, it's really important in my mind.
Well, yeah, when a child is murdered and you have letters claiming to be the person that did it, yeah, that's important.
So what I want to point out is, in this reporting that I'm reading from, it says that it was 2 days since Christopher's body was recovered. They don't give a date, but I'm looking at... So in another newspaper article, it says his body was found on November 26th. So this would have put the article around November 28th, which makes sense. So I guess what I'm saying, what I want to point out is he was missing, I think, from the 22nd. So it's from 22nd to 28th. That's only 6 days. So they've already received these letters. So it's not like there's something where, it's been weeks and weeks or months and months, and you just have some weirdo who's sending a letter to be strange, right? Like, most people probably don't really know a whole lot about this, I would think. I mean, it's happening, people know about it, but that's a really quick turnaround to send a letter saying that,
Right.
It's close in time, I guess, is what I'm trying to point out. In some ways, this kind of reminds me of the Lindbergh baby.
I mean, yeah, I can kind of see that.
You got this ransom note kind of thing, and it makes me wonder if it was some sort of was it going to be a ransom that went sideways and then it turned into that, and so now we're going to try to cover it up in an opportunistic kidnapper saying, well, it's your enemies because I'm not your enemy. I just tried to steal a kid and was going to, kidnap them for ransom, and it didn't work out the way I thought because this is the first time I've ever done this. And so when I gave them these sedatives and the alcohol, it turned out that was too much and the kid died. You know what I mean? Like, I don't.
Right.
I feel like that's, obviously I wasn't there. I don't know, but I feel like that's a plausible thing to think could have happened in this case and might explain some of these things.
I mean, anything's possible here.
But in terms of evidence, it sounds like there was evidence of this tire track, and maybe there was some other evidence that wasn't mentioned in the newspaper near where his body was found. Hopefully that was photographed, collected, whatever, and is still preserved. I don't know. I have no idea. And also these letters, I just think, is there DNA evidence? Are there fingerprints? What is it? And also, coming back to the Marvin Grimm is, he pleads guilty and all this stuff. How did they square these letters with him? I don't remember anything in any of the stuff I read about his case about these letters, about them, saying, you wrote this letter. So I guess they just ignored that?
Right. We'll just say that's irrelevant.
Oh, it's just somebody who sent a letter, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know, and maybe there is some, faux explanation in his case, but I don't remember seeing that in any of the stuff that I read about his case. So that's interesting to me. It makes me wonder if they just disregarded these letters. But now I would be curious, is there DNA? Are there fingerprints? What's left from these letters? Because in 1975, I'm going to bet whoever wrote that, they might have tried to disguise their handwriting, but DNA isn't, nobody knows about that.
Right. They didn't know a thing.
So if you have an envelope, did they lick the envelope? Did they, they touch the paper and you can get the DNA off the paper? Like, I think that could be a way to find out who wrote the letters. Now, maybe whoever wrote the letters is just a weirdo and had nothing to do with the crime, but I think that's the, if this case is reopened and that evidence still exists, that's exactly where I want to start, I think. What do you think?
I mean, I think the letters are an excellent place to start, but really I want to start with everything now all at once.
All at once, yeah.
I want to know more about this tire track. I want to know any physical evidence. Let's have it, DNA'd up one wall and down the next. Let's go back and look at all the case notes, all the interviews, who was talked to, who wasn't, because the clock is ticking. The people that, defense attorneys love delays because witnesses die, memories fade. Well, at this point, this is almost 50 years ago.
We talked about this off camera. If whoever did this to Christopher was 18 at the time, you add 50 years to that. That means they're 68 now.
Right. If
they were 18.
And if they were 40, they're probably not alive.
Right. And so it's going to be really hard. I mean, I think a conviction is basically out the window if it's somebody who's older at the time the crime happened.
But I mean, there could still be a little bit of peace if you could,
figure it out.
Find out this is who it is,
Yeah, absolutely. And I to be clear, I'm not advocating that anybody should give up. I think you got to work this thing just like any other case and run it down and figure it out. I think it's important to do that. You find whatever it is you're looking for?
Yeah, I was. I thought for sure that Christopher and Sarah's father was in the Navy. Maybe I got that mixed up. I know for sure that her and her brother were both in the Navy.
Yeah, I thought for some reason I had it in my head too that
I thought like
maybe we just imagined
like
that.
he was in the military, and when he got out, maybe I'm mixing that up because I can't find that in the notes here anywhere. Or in our back and forth conversations.
But you said Sarah and her brother were?
Sarah and her brother both served in the Navy. After what happened to Christopher, the family moved to Texas, which was closer to Dad's sister, and also why would you want to stay
there?
I mean, unless that's always been home, why would you want to stay there? So I completely understand that. But then her dad went on to, she said that she wasn't really sure, and I'm not sure if she's talking about Oklahoma I'm not sure if she's talking about in Texas or when they were in Richmond, but she's not real sure what her dad did for work, but thought it was in collections. So that may be once
after the fact.
They moved.
Okay. So he was a produce salesman at that point.
Yeah, I just don't trust what newspapers say. That's why I was.
Why not, Bob?
That's why I was looking back at.
They're always accurate.
My conversations with someone who actually,
lived it.
Yeah, was there and knows. But then her dad, they ended up moving to Oklahoma, and her dad became a police officer, and apparently was very, very good at it, and enjoyed it very much until some health concerns, took him out of that field.
There's a clear thread of service in their family. Mom's a nurse, dad's a police officer. Sarah and her brother served in the Navy, so thank you guys for your service. And again, I think it just kind of shows you this picture of, these are these are the people you want to be your neighbors. These are good, hardworking folks.
When she explains, their childhood, obviously she doesn't remember anything probably about Richmond.
Right.
But Texas and then Oklahoma. Her dad retired from being a police officer. She also said, he did what all Italians did. He cooked. So after he, had to retire from the police force, he got cows, pigs, chickens, horses, and all that. So they had a regular farm going in. She was big in like 4-H and FFA and all that stuff. And
that's cool.
And her brothers were into football. So, I mean, this sounds like America.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she did explain that, her mom kind of withdrew a bit from the kids. And I can see that too. You have a kid literally stolen from you and murdered. I can totally see, without consciously doing it, kind of pulling back a little bit.
Yeah.
A fear of being attached. And Sarah's mom didn't have the most nurturing upbringing either. I mean, I'm not saying, anything bad, just it wasn't super loving and supportive.
Well, the reality is, like, when something this horrible happens to somebody, you have no idea. Everybody's a little bit different and are going to respond and react and processing grief differently. And so, I can't imagine.
So Dad's passed away. Mom is still kicking and would like to
see this thing solved.
To know what happened, because she thought she knew what happened for 50 years.
Right.
And the good news is that Mom, since she's retired from nursing and everything, sounds like is making up for some of that time where she was sort of, it sounds like, at least according to Sarah, she has a pretty solid relationship with Mom now, and has that closeness that.
That's cool.
Yeah. So that's a good thing. That's a great thing. But what the hell happened to Christopher?
Right. What happened to Christopher? If you know anything, if you think you know anything, if you know somebody who knows something, you can contact the Richmond PD Crime Stoppers line at 804-780-1000. You could, I'm sure there's ways to reach out to the news media if you want to try to work with promoting this or whatever, figuring things like that out. Also,
or Sarah is not hard to find.
Yeah, social media. She's been in, we're in a handful of true crime groups and forums and whatnot, and I've seen her posting in there, sharing, trying to get the story out, trying to get people to just spread the word so that they can try to figure out what happened in this case.
If you search Christopher Harper on the internet, you will find Sarah. I forget her last name.
Martin,
okay. I knew it was something that was sort of similar to Harper. I know that doesn't sound similar to you, but it's 2 syllables, and
you don't have to explain your weirdness to me.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
I totally get it. But yeah, we, let's solve this thing. This thing needs to get solved.
Agreed. And Sarah, thank you for sharing. You certainly made us feel like we were part of the family.
Yeah, it was really, I didn't meet, and we didn't get to meet in person, but the virtual meet and through our correspondence, I agree. It really felt like I would love to sit around one of those dinner tables and just spend time breaking bread with you and yours. So we're praying for you, and we hope that this thing gets resolved as soon as possible.
Amen. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on the Brothers in Crime podcast. Feedback and suggestions are always welcome. For links and resources related to this episode, please see the show notes or visit us at brothersincrimepodcast.com. We hope you'll save, subscribe, or bookmark us on your favorite podcast site, and join us for the next episode.